Certainly, Bev, that had been the hope. The reality is that it dropped out of our news cycle because of COVID and everything else. It's always been there, including in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan, of course. But what we see now is more the threat of lone actor attacks, and we've seen now, it appears, two such lone actor attacks from a problem that's very persistent. It's not an existential threat, but it's not going away. And it's a particular problem in France. France is polarized much more than we are in Australia. There's a problem on the right. And this, what appears to be a terrorist attack, is outrageous because it wants to provoke a response. And the reality is it's likely to get one from the right, which will then probably provoke further attempts of attacks from what appears to be an Islamist subculture. It's really tragic. And you feel for the 8 million French Muslims, along with the rest of the French nation, because none of these ordinary French people want this.
And of course, moderate Islam, it does not advocate for this. So it is, as you say, it's the extremes on both sides that are sort of spurring this on. President Macron finds himself in a tricky situation. He's kind of spurred a severe backlash because he's come out condemning radical Islam. Was that a mistake in your view?
I think there's a problem with communication, and France has some really deep-seated problems with racism and endemic youth unemployment, particularly in Muslim neighbourhoods, outer suburbs, banlieues. One of the problems for Macron communicating to a global audience is that French laicity or secularism is so very different than what we're used to in the English-speaking world. And it's probably not serving France very well. It's rather too rigid and brittle. And so it's understandable that people, don't understand what he's getting at. I think there is genuine goodwill. I think he recognises that France has these deep-seated problems of socioeconomic inequality and racism, and he wants to address them, but some of that message is not getting through to the global audience.
Since that spate of terror attacks earlier on, over the last 5 years, what do you understand has been done? What have they been doing in France to try and address radical Islam and try and address some of the issues that are causing it?
Well, of course, there's a lot of work done on the police side with counter-terrorism, with intelligence, and that works. A lot of that works with communities too, where it's communities speaking out when they have concerns. But the other side, the so-called soft approach that needs to be done, is working with communities to try and cut off the opportunities for recruiters to get at particularly young people who tend to be their targets, and to address some of the injustices or causes of resentment that make it easier for a recruiter to get in. What Macron is speaking about is the fact that there's some structural problems that need to be addressed in terms of neighbourhoods that are just sort of cut off from mainstream French society for reasons not of their own making, but which the French government now needs to address. But the truth be told, France has made very poor progress on this front and has left a lot of things undone. And so the drivers of terrorism that we've seen in recent years remain there. And for a very small number of recruiters who go after young people, they're finding plenty of opportunities. They've got plenty of material to work with.
Greg, can you explain to us why beheadings? Why is this used as a form of attack? It's so gruesome.
I think that's the answer, Bev. It is so gruesome. Modern terrorism, and terrorism really is a sort of a late 20th, 21st century phenomenon. And things like this, those who carry out these attacks will try and find some justification which they say goes back to religion and to long tradition. The reality is this is a modern innovation. It's done to provoke outrage. It does shock us. It does make us angry. It does make us frustrated. That's what the attackers want to do. They've seized upon, what can a lone actor do? Well, a knife attack is very hard to stop. And how do you make a knife attack more dramatic? Well, attempt decapitations, nothing more gruesome than that, and that's why they're doing it.
Greg, how problematic is the fact that Turkey, Pakistan, other Muslim nations have sort of fed this, particularly in Turkey's case, for political reasons of their own, domestic political reasons of their own? Is this going to cause greater problems and spur on other attackers as a consequence of how they've responded?
Yeah, as you say, Bev, Turkey's making their response, and sadly I think that's true in Pakistan as well, for reasons of domestic politics, but it's playing with fire. On the one hand, it's reasonable to speak up for concerns and to even be critical of people like Macron for the language they use. But what we're seeing goes beyond that. It's trying to accelerate the issue, trying to exaggerate it when it needs to be talked down. We need to find some common meeting point of consensus about addressing legitimate problems. So turning on this language that simply goes on blame and hyperbole will make it worse. Possibly in Pakistan, possibly in Turkey and elsewhere. It sort of sends a green light, unfortunately, to extremists. And as I said earlier, on the other side, on the far right, we'll also see people feeling themselves justified to respond. So this has the potential to be a cycle of violence that no one should want.
Indeed. Greg, always appreciate your expertise. Thanks so much for making time.
Thanks, Bev.